Today on Biblical Higher Ed Talk, I sit down with Jim Kirkland, Executive Director of Christian Chaplains and Coaches, to discuss chaplaincy in North America, a critical ministry meeting the needs of people who are often in crisis. Thank you for tuning in today. I'm your host, Philip Dearborn, president of ABHE, and we are honored to have as our guest this week, Jim Kirkland. Jim is the executive director of Christian Chaplains and Coaching, an organization that's committed to training biblically and theologically sound chaplains and Christian life coaches. And I had the opportunity to meet Jim, maybe 2 years ago. And it's been great getting to know him and his organization and just doing some really neat things. And I thought it would be a great idea to invite him to the podcast to kind of talk about chaplaincy in North America and what's its current state and where it's going. And it's definitely an ever-growing field that needs well-trained chaplains. So that will be the focus of our podcast. So Jim, welcome, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Phil. It's so great to be here. I got to tell you, we really love our collaboration with the ABHE. And in the last couple of years, we've gone to the conference, and we really feel like my entire staff feels the same way as I do. We found our people with you.
Absolutely. Really, and we've appreciated the partnership through the years, and that's certainly been a blessing. And if you go to our annual meetings, you'll see a number of people that are part of sponsoring and being part of ABHE. One of those is Moody Bible Institute, and they are the sponsor for this podcast today. So a special shout out to Moody Bible Institute. So Jim, kick off our conversation as you reflect back over your ministry experiences. Share with us a defining moment that God used in your life that has kind of propelled you to where you are today.
I used to own a business, and for many, many years, I was a business professional, and then started feeling, because I went on a prison ministry weekend, it kind of rocked my world. I started feeling really interested in ministry, and I started serving as a lay volunteer chaplain. I did that for like 15 years while I was running a business, and got increasingly I couldn't shake the feeling of wanting to be in full-time ministry. And by the way, I went back to seminary late in life and graduated from Moody Theological Seminary. That's where I did my master's degree.
That's great.
So extra little shout out to Moody here.
Right. And what's amazing to me, Moody is one of our founding institutions, and their footprint is just the impact that they have had around the world for so many generations is really incredible. But
yeah, well, I had a great experience there, but I just felt so called, and I wanted to be a pastor. I didn't want to be a chaplain, and I kept fighting with God about being a pastor. No, God, I want to be a pastor. And I fought that for such a long time. Doing volunteer chaplaincy, though, in nursing home and prison and jail and first responder type ministry, where I lived up in Michigan at the time, and then got my degree, and then started to transition into pastoral ministry. And between you and me and a fence post, I got chewed up and spit out as a pastor. I totally failed as a pastor, and God kept reminding me, Jim, I keep calling you to chaplaincy, and you keep saying no. And I decided to just do that. And so 15 years volunteering as a chaplain, and then I took on my first job as a professional chaplain, working in a elder care setting, hospice care, nursing home, that kind of thing, up in Holland, Michigan. If you've never been there, it's a beautiful place, beautiful place. Loved it, just fell in love with it. So I decided to go and get my CPE, clinical pastoral education, so that I could become a board certified chaplain. And that was the event that really shocked me, because in my first few weeks of that CPE curriculum, I was literally belittled for having a biblical Christian belief in theology, believing in the Bible, believing in Jesus for salvation, that Christ is the only way to be restored to God. Because I held that as a sincerely held belief, I was really, really challenged by it. The instructor told me, Jim, you can't wear that cross lapel pin anywhere you go in the hospital here.
As a chaplain?
As a chaplain. I can't wear a cross lapel pin because that's pushing your faith on people unwanted. But that was said by my CPE instructor, and we won't talk any names of, what the organization was, because that's kind of irrelevant. It's just an indication of the trend that I saw at that moment.
Yeah.
And so I decided to leave CPE at that point. and prayed to God, you're going to have to take care of me financially, God, if I do this. Because if this is what I have to become to be a board certified chaplain, then I'm not going to be a board certified chaplain. And that really changed the trajectory, if you will, of everything that we do. We became a Christian chaplain ministry specifically. We only launched it 6 years ago. And the vision for our ministry is to restore chaplaincy to biblical Christianity. That's what we're all about. And it came from that seminal moment for me.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. And you think about chaplaincy, and you mentioned the fact of, your first experience in a hospice setting. And I live in central Pennsylvania, and a couple of years back, we had the nickel mines shooting, which was just a tragic story of a gentleman who went into an Amish school and wreaked havoc. But the stories of the chaplains for the first responders still are talked about here in central Pennsylvania, of just the horrific situation that they walked themselves into, those first responders. Yeah. And the role that the chaplains played was significant. A couple of books have been written about it. And to me, chaplaincy is just such a critical role, because you're there in those moments of life's tragedies, often life and death type situations. And it truly is a calling to walk into that kind of environment, into that context. And God certainly did that in your life. Give us a primer on chaplaincy in North America, a bit of a history, bringing us up to where we are today.
History. Oh, you're a history buff. Okay.
Yep.
Well, this is what I love about chaplaincy, is that it has been a distinctly Christian ministry for 1,500 years.
Goes back that far.
It does. It goes back to the legend of Saint Martin, who was a Roman soldier converted to Christianity in the 360s AD, and became Saint Martin of Tours 371 AD, when he was assigned as the Bishop of Tours, what we would call in our faith the pastor of Tours, France. He was a very loving man, very compassionate man, really, really cared for his people, and especially for the poor. And there's a legend of when he encountered a poor beggar. It was cold. And they used to wear these capes, like a picture of Superman cape, this heavy material that they would wear over their backs. And they could, when they're on their horses and it's cold outside, they could wrap the cloak around them, right? The cloak is what it was called. He encountered a cold beggar and used his knife, and he cut that cloak in half, and he gave half of it to the beggar so he could wrap himself in something to keep him warm. And that kind of became a legend. And the term, the French word for cloak, which I believe is capelli, if I'm pronouncing it correctly, is translated into English as the word chaplain.
Interesting.
And the cloak of St. Martin of Tours, which was used to wrap in the warmth this poor, cold beggar, became synonymous with the idea of wrapping somebody in a disastrous situation, in a storm of life, in a trial of life, coming alongside of them and wrapping them into the warmth and love of Jesus Christ.
Wow.
Later, when the Emperor Charlemagne codified the office of chaplain as a special office of clergy throughout France, and they began to build small little chapels that would be occupied by a special clergyman who was literally there to be the keeper of the sacred presence. And that's what chaplaincy means. It means to be the keeper of the sacred presence. Well, fast forward 1,500 years, we believe that it's only a born-again believer in Jesus Christ that has the sacred presence dwelling in them that can be the keeper of the sacred presence. And so that's kind of a history of chaplaincy. But last 50 years, wow, has it been secularized to the point where it's no longer recognized as a Christian institution? And that's what we're trying to do something about.
Yeah, one of the things, it was a article I saw a number of years ago that I won't name the institution, but it was one of the Ivy League institutions had put out a press release that they had hired their first atheist chaplain to the school. And kind of hard to wrap your mind around an atheist chaplain.
I can't get my head around it. I can't. And the organization that started off as Christian 100 years ago, they were the first to do clinical pastoral education, was the Protestant Ministers Hospital Association. And they were very, very biblical and Christian in their approach. And it's really been changed over the last 100 years into something.
So that's the marker, probably about the last 100 years. So for 1400 years, if I heard you correctly with the history of it, very much a Christ-centered Christian function, the role of chaplaincy, and within the last 100 years, it's deviated from that.
Actually, it didn't start deviating until about the 1960s. That's when it really began to change and become secularized and converted into the idea of secular humanism, universalism, New Age thought, many paths to God if God exists at all. Nobody will be in hell because a loving God wouldn't condemn anyone to be in hell. And if God exists, there must be many ways to reach with him. So all religions are equally valid. And now the worldview that is represented in chaplaincy is that's a worldview, right? That's a belief system that people have, which I respect. I'm certainly not there to proselytize or to apologize or argue with people that believe differently than I do, especially when you're working on a team in a chaplain setting with people that believe differently than you do. The Sikh Indians, believers, Muslims, Roman Catholics. I mean, I love these people. We've had some wonderful relationships, but we don't believe the same thing. The movement today is sort of trying to funnel everybody, Christians and everybody, into the same common universalist sort of, for lack of a better term, approach to chaplaincy. And it's causing biblical, born-again, genuine Christians to literally have to comply with a worldview that we don't hold and to hide it.
I'd imagine the reality is also there because sometimes we look at these pressures which are very real on Christianity, evangelical Christianity. But the same could be said also for Islam and Muslims and Jews who hold to a strict perspective on their view of God. The same kind of universalism is being imposed on them as well in this process.
Well, it is. But what's really interesting to me is that like a Muslim chaplain who's a cleric can certainly wear the clearly Muslim garb. Clearly, I'm a Muslim chaplain. Jewish chaplains, same thing. They can wear their garbs. They can wear their I don't remember what the beard is called and the yarmulkes that they wear. Roman Catholic priests can certainly wear their garb that they're wearing. It's really, all of that is fine in secular chaplaincy today, but the biblical Christian that would wear a cross and that would proclaim Christ alone for salvation, they're the ones that are being kind of singled out as not welcome, right?
Yeah.
Increasingly.
Yeah. So the current state, you have a very broad range. You certainly have you and your organization and things that you're doing with chaplaincy training all the way through to non-religious atheist perspective. So it's a very wide range right now.
Right.
Yeah. So the path for somebody wanting to be a chaplain in North America and beyond, what's that process? Do you see some common career patterns for those who become chaplains? Like what's that calling involved?
Well, from a Christian perspective, it starts with a genuine call to ministry, right? We're ministers of the gospel of Jesus Christ. We're there to bring his sacred presence and to love people. But it doesn't matter what faith paradigm you come from or non-faith paradigm. There are common qualifications that in any professional setting that all chaplains need to comply with. They're kind of set by the Board Certified Chaplain Institute, common qualifications for chaplaincy. I think there's 29 items that we must comply with. Things like listening to understand rather than to fix people. We're there to bring a ministry of presence. We're not there to apologize or to push faith unwanted on people. There's things we all need to respect with each other. So the call to Christian chaplaincy is one to serve others. It's to bring the presence of Christ into an encounter with people, to bring his peace to their storm, so to speak. But we can't do that if we're not at peace. So self-awareness, spiritual disciplines play a real part in the role of becoming a chaplain, whether it's vocational or volunteer, doesn't really matter. It's all the same. Career opportunities are going to have each their own sort of expectations. For many hospital settings, Veterans Administration, military, you're going to have an MDiv or higher. Increasingly, you'll have to have 4 courses of clinical pastoral education, become a board certified chaplain. But hospice companies, depending on the state, bachelor's degree or higher, and maybe 1 unit of CPE, and you can get hired as a hospice chaplain in many settings. Prison chaplains, often they're not requiring CPE at all, and sometimes a bachelor's degree or a master's degree that doesn't reach the level of an MDiv can get hired in as a chaplain. It's an alphabet soup out there. I mean, everything is different. We have what I lovingly refer to as our blue-collar chaplains. They have a high school education, maybe a year or two at associate's level of college or certification course or vocational school. They've become an ordained chaplain. They're volunteering. They've become certified as a chaplain with us, and they're serving with Billy Graham Rapid Response Team or for disaster response or Samaritan's Purse. We have one of our chaplains that actually completed his board certification, who we deployed with Samaritan's Purse to Ukraine when the war broke out. We deployed him there twice. Second time, he was training Ukrainian chaplains in the war zone. Wonderful video that Samaritan's Purse put out featuring Chaplain Doolin, that is one of our chaplains. And another chaplain was on the ground along with 17 of our chaplains in Oxford, Michigan a few years ago when they had the high school shooting, a terrible event that took place. So 17 of our chaplains showed up on the ground. None of them are board certified chaplains, but they're trained in critical incidents. They're trained in disaster response. They become a ministering presence. So that type of chaplaincy is kind of unique.
Yeah. So in the broadening of chaplaincy, like we talked about ideologically, theologically, there's also been a broadening of preparation from formal to non-formal to nothing, right? So somebody who just walks into a situation. Do you find that those who are choosing to be chaplains is, I would imagine, my guess would be, the typical career track of an 18-year-old who's entering college is, I want to be a chaplain. That's probably not the what you're seeing. I'm imagining it's adults who are later on in life or a second career or third career.
Oh yeah, absolutely. In fact, we have one of my favorite stories was a pastor who had been a pastor for over 30 years. He had his master's in divinity. He pastored the same church for 30 years. And when he was getting ready to transition to retirement, he wanted to go into hospice care and do elder care work so he could still stay in ministry. But in order to do that, the job he wanted required board certification. So he had to come back to school and do 4 courses of CPE, and he did those with us, and then got the hospice job after he retired as a chaplain. And with tears on his face, he said, "Jim, if I had only known what was going to happen inside of me from this deep self-awareness that I've come to through that type of learning, I would have done CPE a long time ago, and it would have made me a better chaplain."
Wow.
Then we also have people that have a high school education that have taken a unit or 2 of CPE, and they're involved in going to the jails or the prisons or police departments or what have you, and bringing the sacred presence to them. So it's really a diverse opportunity.
Yeah. Yeah. So, when I think chaplain, traditionally, I think military, and that's a formal track, right? In order to be a chaplain in the military, it's an MDiv degree and certification.
MDiv, and doesn't require CPE, although, and we're an endorser that places people in the military. We collaborate with the National Association of Evangelicals Chaplains Commission as an approved endorser for military with them. It's just a great organization. And, we're proud of our military chaplains, but they don't have to have CPE, but they often come to us to take CPE. They can earn their clinical hours by being the base chaplain wherever they're deployed.
Yeah.
So,
my wife's grandfather served in World War II as a chaplain. In fact, on our shelf downstairs, we have a couple of the Bibles, New Testaments, that he used out on the field. And it's one of those situations. I wish I had known him. Amy doesn't remember stories, but I'm sure he had many to share in a combat situation as a chaplain. Such a unique calling to fulfill. So for colleges and universities interested in starting chaplaincy preparation programs, what are their options? Recognizing that we're talking adult learners, second, third career folks who may be interested in some formal education. What are the options?
Yeah, I would actually say that probably the average age of our chaplains is in the 50s.
Okay.
They come to chaplaincy, a lot of them late in life, sometimes second career. Sometimes they just want to serve, and the setting that they're going into, having the ordination as a chaplain, gives them clergy confidentiality protections, especially important when you're taking confessions from a prisoner, right? That may be confessing a crime they've never been convicted of, and they're turning their lives over to Jesus. So because of that, because most of our chaplains are a little bit older, more mature, they've had life experience, they're not the 18-year-olds that are coming to chaplaincy. It's an opportunity for them to go back and finish a degree, many of which, we've got a bunch of our chaplains that they have their high school, but now they're getting an opportunity through some of our seminary or university collaborations to get a 2-year associate's degree in chaplaincy. You know, a couple of your ABHE schools that are working on those kinds of things with us, or finish a bachelor's degree, and then, or continue on and get their master's degree. And in all of those programs, clinical pastoral education is an option that can earn credit toward the degrees. And when we were really dealing with your accrediting people, they did a calculation. I think you guys call it the Carnegie scale. That's a little bit different terminology for me. It was new for me.
Yeah.
That allowed for up to 6 hours of credit for CPE. So what a college, university, seminary has the ability to do is to say, if they recognize, as we do, that chaplaincy is a really growing ministry, it is becoming increasingly in demand. And if somebody wants to be a board certified chaplain, they have to get their MDiv. The minimum requirement is a 72-hour MDiv, not a 90-hour MDiv, not a 120-hour MDiv, because it's specific to chaplain work.
Right.
And the minimum is 72 hours. So they go get their MDiv and they graduate, and then they go to get a job. Well, we can't hire because you don't have your CPE. You don't have your board certification. So now they got to go back to school for another 1 to 2 more years, right? So what a lot of the institutions that are ABHE institutions that are working with us are saying is that we see a lot of demand from this from our students. And it doesn't make sense to not include the chaplain-specific training, the CPE training, as part of the degree. So that's, I think, a major opportunity for one of your institutions to include CPE in the program for up to 6 hours credit per CPE unit towards the degree.
Yeah. And you have a relationship with a number of our schools. And I'd say if anybody's listening to this and wants, it's kind of a plug and play that you can build right into existing degrees and market it from the perspective of offering chaplaincy programming for, like you said, a growing area. And, you know, you even look, there are corporate chaplains, right? Businesses are hiring chaplains onto their team. So it really, there are many opportunities out there. It's definitely a field that's growing. There's challenge that we talked about before, but definitely a growing field. So talk about those challenges. What would you say? There are many, but what would you say are the top 3 challenges facing those preparing to be a chaplain?
There's quite a few challenges, but I would say probably first and foremost is the increasing secularization of America. I don't think we're a Christian nation any longer. I think we're predominantly a mission field today. And the mission field is now across the street. It's not overseas.
Which maybe is the reason why the need for chaplaincy is growing.
It's definitely needed because we need people that are trained on how to be ambassadors of Christ, who can be mission-minded in their approach, culturally sensitive, culturally competent, learn how to engage without pushing faith uninvited and unwanted on people the way a missionary would, right? We help them dig a well first.
Yeah.
We eat food with them first. We develop a relationship with them first. And that's essentially what chaplains do, but we do it outside of the church in secular settings, representing the church that we belong to, right? So the secularization, the movement away from biblical Christianity is certainly one of the challenges that we face because it's harder and harder to be able to speak Christian language without people being repelled by it because they don't understand the language we use as Christians. We use words like sin and confess and repent in our conversations with people that don't know anything about what we believe, and they're only associating those words with a negative connotation. They have no clue what we mean by those words.
Right.
And so secularization causes us to learn how to be culturally relevant and to learn how to speak a language in their setting that they can relate to. Second, I think, would be the anti-Christian bias that has seeping its way into professional chaplain settings, which is huge. It's really huge. It's making it very difficult, especially in vocational settings, to be Christian. Even words like spiritual, which you and I would take to mean something that involves eternal, is being changed because we have to accommodate chaplains who see that word spiritual differently than we do, as it has historically been seen. Spiritual may not even mean something of eternal significance. So they're trying to change the word spiritual. They're using the word, but they mean emotional care. They don't mean spiritual care, right? Mm-hmm. Or the word pastoral. They don't mean what we mean by shepherding somebody into a safe space where they can encounter the risen Lord, right? They don't mean that at all. The word Christian doesn't even mean Christian, depending on who you're talking to, right? So that anti-Christian bias is something. And I'd say the third is sincere Christians who come to chaplaincy, having been raised in the culture and the paradigm and the thinking and the language usage of church, which is what they know, come to secular chaplaincy in non-Christian settings with a go and tell attitude rather than an arrive and listen attitude.
Yeah.
And that's got to be trained out of people if they're going to be effective ministers in secular settings that can still have a chance of sharing the good news.
Yeah, and that's modeled by Christ. I think that's how he approached ministry, was to understand, listen to the people around him, and then use that as building trust as a platform to share the good news.
I think I counted in the New Testament 100 and, if I'm remembering from when I had to do a theological paper on this, 105 times, I think, roughly, where Jesus was asked, where he asked a question, and then he let them answer it without giving them the answer.
Yeah. 5
times he gave an answer to a question that he asked, or so. I don't remember the exact number, but it was very few times where he actually gave the answer. Most times he just asked a question and then let them talk themselves to truth. And my favorite example of that is the road to Emmaus, where Jesus showed up after he'd been resurrected, right? And these guys were on their way home from Jerusalem, and they're dejected, and they're talking with one another about, oh my God, they've crucified our Lord. What are we going to do now? Our whole hope for the future has died. What do we do? Jesus showed up, and he starts walking along with them on the road. And he said, so what is this conversation that you're having about what's going on? And they were incredulous. And they said, where have you been that you don't know what's been going on in the crucifixion of our Lord and the things that have happened in Jerusalem recently? And Jesus said, what things? That's chaplain as you get right there, brother.
Yeah, really
and then he let them talk their way to Jesus right until they shared the meal. And then after he broke the bread, then he just disappeared because they recognized him for who he was. I love that story. He didn't give him an answer. He asked a question. That's what we need to learn.
Asking questions, not giving answers.
Yeah.
I love it. So we have 1 minute left, and just use that minute to kind of tell us, so where do you see chaplaincy going in the next 10 years?
I see it in the next 10 years becoming the preeminent form of missional community and missional ministry for Jesus Christ in the United States, because we, at least in our ministry, are training our Christian chaplains to be undercover chaplain commandos who are serious about the mission that Jesus has given us. And the mission is what Jesus says it is. It is not what the world says it is. But helping your students and our chaplains learn how to do that effectively while praying for the Holy Spirit to open the door to the gospel, while we serve everybody, we love everybody, we don't judge anybody, we don't condemn anyone. We just love everybody. We see the image of God, the imago Dei, in every person that we encounter, no matter what they believe, no matter abhorrent their lifestyle or beliefs may be. We love them as they are. And if we can bring that kind of love to people, one of two things is going to happen, right? They're either going to be attracted to Jesus or they're going to be repelled from Jesus. Those who are attracted to Jesus will open up the door to the gospel. And now guess what? We're in a disciple-making relationship, and that's the mission. And if they reject Jesus, they're not rejecting us. Jesus said, shake the dust off of your feet. Don't give up. Don't quit. Go to the next one and keep going forward. And that's what we want our chaplains to learn. And that's what your ministry students most need to learn as our country is a growing mission field.
Yeah. So well said, Jim. And this has been a great conversation. Really appreciate your time and for sharing your wisdom and experiences with us today. Thanks for being a guest.
You're welcome. And thanks for having me be part of ABHE too. We love you guys.
Absolutely. And if you'd like more information about Jim and his organization, Christian Chaplains and Coaching, we did put a link in the show description where you can access that. And as you heard from Jim, graduate of Moody Bible Institute, we want to thank them for their sponsorship of this podcast. So until next time, stay kingdom focused.